Welcome to the Sports Philosopher's Rant. I'm Jordan. You're probably wondering why I call myself a sports philosopher. Well, I'm as an avid sports fan, particularly college football, of the Alabama Crimson Tide in particular. Also, avid baseball, basketball, NFL, tennis fan, you name it. Also follow NASCAR, but I also have a master's degree in philosophy and in history. So I have quite a background in education and things of that nature too. Also a longtime bartender as well. So sharing my vast wealth of useless and random knowledge by day and then serving the Holy Spirits by night tends to be the way of life for me from time to time. Anyhow, on this channel I intend to talk about all kinds of various topics, starting out with sports. Occasionally I might branch off into other things, anywhere from current events, gaming, history, philosophy, ancient civilizations, conspiracy theories occasionally. Try to avoid politics. That stuff tends to only anger me and things of that nature. I also have a background in theology as well, so I kind of all over the place with things like that. Hopefully that you'll find this information sometimes to be fascinating. If not, well, I'm sure you'll find something to disagree with. People like to disagree quite often as well. Big week it's been for college football news. Particularly, obviously, the national championship game was Monday night. I was intending to try to get my comments and thoughts out before that game happened, and my thoughts going into the game were basically that if you look at the two teams on paper, both Clemson and LSU, if you break them down position by position in a vacuum where you're not really looking at all of the details and everything, I think it's fairly clear that Clemson probably had the better roster going in. They had a little bit more talent, I think. They've been there before, so I mean, you have to think. I think if you're just looking at the teams on paper and not really watching all the games, that they probably were the better team. However, throughout the course of the season, it became increasingly clear to me and a lot of people that LSU this year is just the team of destiny. It's just their year. It looks like they're the ones that are just meant to be. They had a lot of bounces go their way, but I mean, Joe Burrow, you cannot say enough about how incredible he's played this year, which is really remarkable if you look at how they played last year and compare it to this year. Just the absolute progress he made. That's well-deserved credit goes to the coaching staff for that, for the changes they made to the offense, and it's just an unbelievable job. And the game basically went that way. At first, you could see that Clemson jumped off to an early lead. LSU, I think, might have had a little bit of jitters going in initially there. They hadn't really been on the grandest stage before. So I think there might have been a little bit of nerves. But after they stopped getting pinned back deep, that offense just took off and never really looked back. And the defense really shut Clemson down in the second half. And Clemson was in a place that they don't find themselves very often when they're having to play from behind. So I think those factors really combined together to give the game to LSU, which I think they've had an amazing year. And I mean, I don't have had a real stake in that matchup either way. I don't really like either one of those teams, but congrats to LSU, great season. I mean, if you look at just their accomplishments this year based on their resume and the teams they beat, this easily is one of the greatest teams of all time, at least as far as accomplishments go. I'm not saying that they are the most dominating team that's ever played, but as far as what they accomplished to get there, you got to give them a lot of credit, and I think there is some valid points to be made for the season that they had, being one of the best. They did, however, lose their passing game coordinator and quarterback coach Joe Brady to the Carolina Panthers of the NFL, and that's not the biggest surprise ever. I mean, he was going to blow up in with his stock and career trajectory really quickly there, obviously, after the job he did with Burrow this year. And so he gets out, so it's going to be interesting to see how they rebuild next year. And they also have a new quarterback coming in, a new quarterback that they're going to have to work with. They're losing a lot of players to the NFL, which usually happens to teams that win the national championship. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here and how they rebound. Another big news out there this is actually last weekend. This happened. Mike Leach hired by Mississippi State. I mean, as an SEC fan, I've been wanting to have this guy in the SEC for years. I think it's awesome that somebody finally stepped up and made it happen. We get some of the most humorous press conferences known to man come from this guy. I think it's a really good hire for Mississippi State. A lot of people think that his air raid offense isn't really going to work in the SEC, but I really think that teams in general, like Mississippi State, which is they're in a power conference, but they're not the big ticket program out there, and they're having to compete with a lot of these other schools that have more natural recruiting bases, and they have more tradition and more championship caliber programs. I think when you're a program like Mississippi State, you got to think a little bit outside the box. And I think a good example of what not to do sometimes is kind of what Arkansas did a few years ago. They went out and hired a otherwise pretty respectable coach with Brett Bielema, but I felt like he was trying too much to emulate what some of those other programs do by recruiting those big offensive linemen and do that ground game kind of offense, which I didn't really think that was the best idea, because you can't really outdo the programs like the Alabamas, the LSUs, or the Georgias of the world when you're at Arkansas like that. It makes a lot more sense from my perspective to when you're at a little program like that, and one that's doesn't have the recruiting resources and things like that. You need to think outside the box and go with a special type of system that can exploit teams more so, rather than just doing what everybody else is trying to do. And I think that's where Mississippi State got it right in this situation. Hiring a guy like Mike Leach, who has proven that give him time to get his players in there, and he will have success. Now, he's probably not going to win the national championship. I mean, he probably won't win the SEC outright anytime soon, but I mean, he'll be probably a contender for it in the next few years. And you see, they really had to do something. I don't even think that Joe Moorhead was that bad of a coach, but he clearly just never really fit there very well. I mean, he was losing control. He had fights in the locker room and things like that. It's just not a good look, and they had to do something. I mean, 2 years is a short time, but when it's obvious that the fit just isn't working, then you got to cut them loose. And they're also having to respond to Ole Miss hiring Lane Kiffin, which Lane Kiffin, what can you say about him? I say he's a very high-risk, high-reward type of guy. He's as good as anybody when it comes to calling an offense. He's very good with quarterbacks. He's a pretty well-respected recruiter as well. The only question with him, can he stay out of his own way and stop self-destructing? That seems to be the problems he's had in the past. You look at what he did at Tennessee. Meant this is years ago now, but he did a really good job with up to that point, extremely disappointing quarterback, Jonathan Crompton, and he turned him into a pretty good quarterback there. So, I mean, he's proven that he's dangerous when it comes to coaching quarterbacks and coaching them up, and it's really scary to think of what he can do if he can get Plumlee to be a good passer, because the guy's already proven he's a very good athlete. If he can get him to be an accurate passer, we're going to have a really dangerous team there potentially in Oxford. And you got to think, I mean, Kiffin's been a little bit on the more quiet side the last few years. He's flown under the radar a little bit there at Florida Atlantic, excuse me. So maybe he's matured and learned from his mistakes in his earlier years when he was at Tennessee and USC. If so, I mean, the state of Mississippi is going to be a really entertaining place to watch in the years to come in the SEC with these two new coaches in there. Good job by both of these programs going out and getting game-changing coaches, and time will tell how well they work out. But it will definitely be exciting. It's going to make for some entertainment in the SEC media days and things of that nature here coming up in the future. In the midst of the recruiting season now, I mean, it's kind of the slow period here when the national championship's over and everybody wonders who's going where, what coaching changes are happening, and things of that nature. It's been kind of quiet on the Alabama side of things this offseason so far. People are wondering if we're going to make a change at defensive coordinator or not. Keep hearing people ask about that. No news out of there yet. I mean, we're just kind of waiting along. Probably can do a more detailed look at recruiting here with the upcoming videos. I mean, we're still kind of in the waiting game on the last few that announced in early February there at the final national signing day. We've already got most of them committed now. A lot of people obviously are really excited to see what some of these new players like Bryce Young are going to do, but I mean, we'll get into that more in an upcoming video. But I mean, coaching-wise, I mean, there's also the possibility that LSU, we talked about them a few minutes ago and how they've already lost Joe Brady to the Carolina Panthers. There's some talk out there that Baylor might be targeting Dave Aranda, which I've always thought was one of the best defensive coordinators in the business. That would be a really big loss if he does go there, but time will tell. I mean, he's stayed there for a long time, so you never really know. Obviously, some of these coaches, I mean, most of them, their goal is to end up being head coaches, except for the eternal enigma that is Brent Venables there at Clemson, which seems to never even try to get hired in spite of his incredible credentials and great success he's had there. I don't know how somebody hasn't hired him yet, unless he just doesn't want to be a head coach, which, I mean, with the kind of money he's making, it's really hard to blame him if that is the case. I mean, he's making, I think, $2 million a year now, which, geez, $2 million a year. And then, I mean, you talking about buyouts and things of that nature some of these coaches get. I mean, we could talk all day about that. I mean, I laugh to people all the time about how Tennessee is still paying Butch Jones $200,000 a month to wash Nick Saban's car, and at Alabama when Alabama themselves is only paying him $35,000, which sounds like he'd be on the poverty line when he's picking up a buyout money from Tennessee, $200,000 a month, not the coach. I mean, that's just, people don't understand. I don't know what these athletic directors are thinking with some of these buyouts, but unfortunately, the way these agents are getting in the competition, it's just, I don't see any stop in sight for it. And I mean, some of these coaches, I know Will Muschamp, a lot of people were saying he was probably going to get fired, but then they mentioned his buyout's approximately $20 million. My goodness. And then, of course, there's the infamous situation there at Auburn with Gus Malzahn's buyout being initially over $30 million. I mean, it's just, college football is big business, no doubt. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you for joining today. If you liked, please like the video, subscribe if you want, and if you have any suggestions for future topics or anything of that nature, just put them in the comments, and I'll be happy to consider them, and I'm sure at some point I'll get to them or any other random content in the future. Thank you.